All right, everybody, welcome back. I hope you're enjoying the program. This is segment 3 where we're going to be talking about rental properties. Now, I know I got a lot of stuff on the board up here. Don't stress out. I'm going to go through each part. Rental properties, there's a lot of math involved when it's figuring, you're figuring your returns, but I'm going to teach you guys a lot of detail on the math behind rental properties. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is not only for your own benefit to understand what kind of return you're getting on your money, but the other thing too is there's a lot of bank financing involved with rental properties. Most people finance their rental properties, whether they pay cash and then refinance later or refinance from up front. The trick is most people don't understand banks, or they don't understand how a banker thinks. So what I'm doing is I'm giving you an unfair advantage over everybody else. By the time you're done with this segment, you're actually going to know, you're going to be able to think like a banker and basically cheat your way into getting a better loan or a loan in general, because you're going to be giving the banker everything they want to look for. Trust me when I tell you, they've never seen any customer deliver this kind of information. So when you show them this kind of information, it gives you, an advantage that just most people just don't ever know about. You could go to the average real estate investor that owns rental properties, and they don't even understand this stuff. So don't get overwhelmed. Take a lot of notes. Rewatch the video over and over and over. But we'll start getting through this. So again, rental properties, a quick overview. We like the rental properties because it's long-term wealth. You get to enjoy the tax benefits of owning real estate. You get to enjoy the appreciation of these houses going up over time. You get to enjoy the cash flow every month. And eventually when you sell, you get that capital gain and you get to cash out your equity. The nice thing too is if you own a rental property for 20 years and you buy that rental property with a 20-year amortization mortgage, the likelihood that house, it'll be paid off in 20 years. And, if your rents go up on average about 3% a year, which is the national average, then in 20 years, imagine this. You've got all of those rental properties that you own paid for free and clear by the tenants. You got that, they're worth twice as much than when you bought them. The rents are twice as high. It's really a great long-term strategy. Rental properties in the short term, it's not super exciting. It's small cash flow. It's really the compounding that happens over time that is why I like rental properties. So let's jump in here. So starting out, because rental properties are usually financed either when you pay cash for them, you do the rehab, you get a tenant in them, and then you refinance them. That's kind of been my model over the years I leveraged. The reason I was able to buy and hold over 400 properties is because I leveraged. And, I was buying, paying cash, or even in some cases getting a loan up front, rehabbing, and then refinancing, pulling all my cash back out, and then starting the process over again. I got really fast at that. At one point, I was adding about 20 rental properties a month just to put in my own portfolio. So let's talk about that. So the nice thing about bank financing with rental properties is you can go really fast. You can recycle the same money over and over and over again if you know what you're doing, which I'm going to teach you guys how to do because of leverage. But here's the key. Leverage is great when you're trying to, expand quickly. But, leverage can be a two-edged sword, because if you have a bunch of vacancies, then all of a sudden these rental properties, that mortgage payment never stops coming due. So if you don't have anybody living in that property, that doesn't mean your expenses stop. If you get a bunch of vacancies, and we're going to talk about the two things that can really ruin your rental properties returns. We'll talk about those later, but vacancy is one of them. So keep in mind that bank leverage is great, but it can kill you if you don't have good property management. Okay. So there's 3 different ways to figure your financing when you're dealing with a rental property. One is your cash on cash return. So if you're using bank financing, generally speaking, with financing involved, you're going to figure a cash on cash return. And we're going to go through an example of that here in a minute. If you're paying all cash for that property, or you want to measure what all cash the return that all cash will give you, you would figure it on a cap rate. That's just the term for figuring what your money is, how hard is your money working. And then the thing that the banks want to see, they want to know what your DSCR is. What DSCR means is debt service coverage ratio. That's the banker talk. Now, bankers never hear a customer talk about DSCR. I bring that up in every conversation I have with bankers because I want them to know I'm a lot more sophisticated and I understand the numbers better and I understand what they want to hear about so that they give me more money and they lend me more money. So we're going to talk about each one of these things. I'm going to jump around a little bit. So just kind of stick with me here. I had a lot of stuff to write, but follow through. Again, rewind this video, take a lot of notes. You'll be able to. You probably won't get the gist of this the first time you see it. You'll have to watch this again. But let's just talk. Let's just say for the average property, let's say we're going to figure cash on cash return. So let's just use an example here. First of all, let's say that the rent on this particular property that we're buying is $1,000 a month. Let's say the taxes are $150 a month. I'm just using round numbers to give you guys an idea. Let's say that the insurance is $50 a month. Let's say that you figure a monthly maintenance number of $75 a month. This is the number that I use on my rental properties. Let's say that the management company is charging you 10% of the gross rents per month, which is the national average. So 10% of $1,000 would be $100 a month. Now, let's say because we are figuring on cash, let's say we have a mortgage on the property. Now, how I figured this mortgage, I'm using an example here. So basically what I'm figuring is I bought this particular property for $70,000, okay? I put $20,000 into it for repairs. So basically I'm all in for $90,000 as a round number. Okay, so I know that a bank on average I'm going to be getting a loan for 80% of my number. I'm just using that example. If you really steal the property and you get a really good deal, you can refinance and pull all your money out. In that particular case, you have an infinite return. But I'm just trying to use a 20%. If you use a 20% almost like down payment off of your all in, that's going to give a measurement of your leverage and of your money. So we're all in for 90. We got a bank loan for 80% of that, which is $72,000. Okay, $72,000 on a 20-year amortization at 5% interest. That payment's about $475 a month. Now, everybody in here everybody that's watching has a smartphone. You can get a mortgage calculator, download. Just go on your iTunes or whatever it is that you have for your phone. Go into iTunes, do a search for mortgage calculators. There's a whole bunch of free ones. Download one, and you can plug these numbers in, and it'll automatically do this stuff for you. That's all I did. I just plugged in $72,000, 20-year amortization, 5% interest. It gave me a payment of $475. Okay, so we're going to jump back over here. So I plugged in that $475 right here. So again, we got rent minus $150 for taxes, minus insurance of $50, minus maintenance of $75, minus the management fee of 10%, which is $100, minus the mortgage, which we just figured, minus vacancy. I use a 5% vacancy, so that's 5% of $1,000 is $50. When you subtract all these out, I'm ended up with $100 a month cash flow. Not super exciting, right? But let's just see what that number figures out to. Okay, so if we take $100 a month and we take that number times 12, we get $1,200 a month. Now, because we want to figure it on an annual basis. Okay, so this thing is cash flowing us $1,200 a month. So now, if we take that number and we're figuring cash on cash return, we take $1,200. Now stay with me here. We take the $1,200 divided by the amount of down payment we have, which is 20%, and 20%, because we got a mortgage of 80%, 20% of that number is $18,000. So hopefully that you guys stayed with me there. So in other words, to figure it on a year, we take the cash flow times 12 to get the yearly cash flow of $1,200. We financed 80%, which left 20% left. So 20%, or if you take 80% minus the all-in and leave that 20%, that's $18,000. So we took $1,200 divided by 18,000, and that gives us 6.7% cash-on-cash return. Now, is that good? Now, that's a little low in my opinion. Most of the time, I like buying properties with when I'm figuring leverage, cash-on-cash return, I like hitting that 15% and sometimes 20% on single-family homes. That's a really high number. I've bought a lot of properties at 12%, but, it's your own personal comfort level and what you're looking for, but that's how you figure cash-on-cash return. The other thing too is if you're selling a property to an investor, you're going to base it on what they're looking for too. A lot of people say, "Hey, I want to make 10%." Okay, so that is cash on cash return. Now, let's figure cap rate. Cap rate is figured without using the mortgage payment because it's based on no leverage, okay? So all we have to do to figure cap rate is we do this math again, only we don't subtract out the $475. So basically we're adding $475 back to this $100 a month, which gives us $575. So we take the $575 times 12. Okay, so we add that back in, $575 times 12. And then we take and divide that number, that $575 times 12, we divide that into our all-in. Okay, so if we take $575 times 12 divided by 90,000, we will get a cap rate of 7.7%. So, is that good? Well, cap rate is measuring your money. So, I always say, well, people say, well, what's a good cap rate? Well, I always say, what are you getting on your savings, in your savings account now for a return? 0.5%, 1/4%? What are you getting in a CD? 1%, 2%, something in that range? So is 7.7 good? It's not bad. It's not great. What's really strong? 10%, 12% caps are really strong right now. That's generally what I try to hit. I like to hit that 10 to 12 cap and higher. But, it's not bad. If you're in Southern California, a 7.7 cap is probably really good. If you're in the Midwest, it's probably average. So, some of that depends on where you live in the country and based on the expense of how expensive some of these properties get. Okay, so, that is cap rate. So now, how do you figure debt service coverage ratio? Well, what we're doing there is we're basically figuring out, we're taking this and subtracting this math out, kind of like we did with cap rate. So you don't add in this you don't subtract out the 475. So again, if we did this math, we'd come up with 575. Now, what we're doing then is we would take that added back in as 575, and then we would divide that out by the actual mortgage payment. I know that sounds a little confusing, but that's how it's figured. So if we took 475, added it back to the 100, and then divided out what our mortgage payment would be, that would be 575 divided by 475, and that debt service coverage ratio comes up to a 1.21. Well, now, most of you guys have never seen debt service coverage ratio. Some of you might have seen cap rate or cash on cash. But since that's brand new, you say, well, is that good? Is 1.21 good? Well, I want to tell you, 1.2 is what most banks look for their minimum. So it's good. That's good. A 1.2 is good. But 1.5, to give you an example, 1.5 would be excellent. If you get over a 1.5 and start hitting the 1.7, 1.8, or 2.0, I mean, that's a slam dunk. A banker's going to look at that and say, hey, this person knows what they're doing. First of all, they knew how to figure debt service coverage ratio, but they know what they're doing. And, this property is very strong. It will easily, what debt service coverage ratio measures is how well does the property carry the debt. 1.2 leaves basically a 20% excess, and a 1.5 is 50%. That's how they're looking at it. So they're saying, hey, this 1.21, it carries itself pretty good. A 1.5 would be really good. 1.8 or 2.0 is amazing. So that's how the bankers are looking at it. I wanted to go over that stuff with you guys. Now, what I want you to do, I've got a lot of, there's a couple documents below that you can print out and study. I want to do an action step. I want you guys, and I've also included a video below on bank financing and how to get bank financing. I want you guys to go through all of that stuff, hit pause, start practicing this. Go through and practice several different properties that you're looking at buying for rental properties. Figure out your cash on cash, figure out your cap rate, and get good at figuring out your debt service coverage ratio. I know we just covered a lot. Rewind if you have to and go through it again. But go through that and then we'll come back. Okay guys, watch this video and then it's time for an action step, and I'll be back as soon as the video is done.
This is a video on how to find a bank for financing. First, go to yellowpages.com, type in bank in your area. Multiple pages will come up. So go ahead and scroll to the last page in your area and start at the bottom. This will allow us to contact the smaller banks first, which are usually more creative and flexible with their lending. Write down at least 20 banks to call at first. Once you finish writing the bank information down, go ahead and start calling the banks. Ask for someone in the mortgage department. If they ask you if it's for a commercial loan or a residential loan, tell them it's for a commercial loan on a residential property. The first thing you want to say is that you're a real estate investor looking to buy property in the local area, and you're looking for a local bank to work with and have a few questions. Usually, they'll go ahead and take your questions now, in which case you'll want to pull up your bank questionnaire and begin asking those questions. Write down the name of the bank, the banker's name, and contact phone number. Then begin to ask the questions. We want to know if they work with investors that live outside of the lending area as long as the property is local. We want to know what areas or cities that they currently lend to, and if they have any in-house or portfolio loan products. If they do, have them explain those to you and write those down here. We want to know what their seasoning requirements are for refinance loans. So if you paid cash for a house last month, fixed it up, rented it out, can you refinance it with them immediately? We also want to know what their loan to value is, and if their refinance loans are based on purchase price or the appraisal price. Ask them what their bank's maximum lending limit or aggregate is for any one investor, and if their in-house loans get reported to the credit bureaus if they're under a business name, such as an LLC. Then ask what the maximum lending limit that you can personally approve without taking it to the board or committee. And lastly, we want to know how fast they can turn around most of these loans. Once you're finished asking those questions, go ahead and thank them for their time. Call the rest of the banks that are on your list and fill out the sheet as well. Then you should have about 3 to 6 banks that you can currently work with and feel comfortable with refinancing your loans through. Remember that it is a numbers game, so just like the 25-to-1 system, you might have to call 25 banks in order to get one bank that you'd like to work with. So just keep trying and calling banks in your area. Some will tell you what you're trying to do is impossible, and the very next phone call you might find a bank that says that they can do that for you. And that's how to find banks for financing.
Okay, so welcome back. Let's talk about, we're in the rental property segment. Let's talk about location of these rental properties. Where should you buy them? Okay, so, I explained before the A, B, C, D, and F locations. A being, your higher end $1 million homes, your F being the high crime. I would definitely not buy rental properties in the F locations. Your turnover costs, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, would be extremely high. You're going to have vacancy. You're not going to get appreciation. You're going to get tenants that are probably going to beat up the properties. I avoid the F areas. I just don't buy there for rentals. It's just too risky. Let's talk about the B areas. So B's, yes, that's a good area. Obviously with Bs, you're going to have pretty good appreciation. You're going to get a good quality potential tenant. You're going to have probably lower vacancy and a higher rent. You're probably going to have those types of people are probably going to be moved more often. Most of the time, from my experience, the B location, those houses, you're going to attract a tenant that's going to live there for maybe a year or two, and then they're going to move out, and they're probably going to end up buying a home. I like B locations because you do get more appreciation, and so you're going to have less cash flow because those houses are more expensive, but you're going to have more appreciation, so it's a good mix. C locations, these are perfect rental properties. You're going to have okay appreciation, but you're going to have a high demand for these type of properties because they're a little cheaper to rent. You can buy them cheaper. This is one of those things where majority of your rentals will be in C locations. So, you're going to attract a pretty good tenant there. You're not going to have as much turnover as Bs. These tenants tend to stay a little longer. So, keep that in mind when you're buying your rentals. Potentially you could buy a property in a D location, and I put maybe. And the reason I put that is I like to look before I buy in a D location. Obviously we're not going to get a ton of appreciation in a D location, and you're going to have tenants that are probably going to beat the property up a little bit more. These are not the type of people that are probably thinking homeowner type status. So you're going to be able to get these houses really cheap. So my strategy when I buy a D property for a rental property, I'm usually thinking Section 8. What's Section 8? Section 8 is government subsidies for housing. They pay the tenants rent. So, Section 8 has made a lot of improvements over the years. It used to be, those were the absolute worst tenants. They destroyed the house. Now that program's really gotten a lot better. The Section 8 tenants in a lot of locations have to maintain, they have to be working, or they have to be, if they're not working, they have to be taking classes on how to get a job or, be a better employee. Their kids have to hit a certain, they have to be at a certain, attendance at school. So they can't miss a bunch of school. They track that. If the kids aren't making it to school, then they'll pull their voucher. You don't want to lose your voucher in Section 8. Once you lose it, you never get it back. So these tenants tend to, they're getting better because they're getting more strict with the program. They don't want to lose that voucher. That's free rent. So in a lot of times, I like that because the first of the month, that money gets wired directly into your account automatically. Now, one argument is, hey, where's this country going to be in 5 years? Will this Section 8 money, eventually go away, or will it shrink? Possibly. But I think that's going to be one of the last programs to really, you'd have mass hysteria, you'd have riots if all of a sudden nobody had a place to live. So I have a feeling they're probably going to protect that, program for quite a while. So, we want to make sure that if we do a D area that we've got that automatic rent. You never have to chase down a tenant. You don't have a lot of evictions because you're constantly getting paid. So that's where I use that strategy. It's a cash flow strategy only. You buy the house cheap, you don't repair it with as high a scope of work as maybe you would, a B location, and you just cash flow that out forever. It's not something that you're going to flip and sell likely. It's just a cash flow property. So let's roll that into, and I didn't mention A, by the way, because the A locations, those houses are really expensive. They don't cash flow. $1 million house. If for example, $100,000 house rents for $1,000 a month, a lot of times people say the 1% rule, which isn't a very good rule to use for a guideline. But they'll say, well, if a $100,000 house, if 1% rule will rent for $1,000 a month, well, I can tell you right now, a $1 million house isn't going to rent for probably $10,000 a month. It's probably not going to happen. It's probably going to be $3,500 or $4,000. So that's kind of how that works, and it just doesn't cash flow, so we just don't buy them. So let's jump into the scope of work for each. So if this is the areas we're going to be, buying properties, how much work are we going to put into these things? Well, in a B location, this is a nicer home. Your rehab on a B location is almost going to be like a fix and flip type of a rehab, maybe just down a little bit from there. You're going to get a lot more rent for these, so you're going to put a little bit more in them. So we generally do a few upgrades. Like we might upgrade the tile, kitchen, we'll put tile in potentially. We might have backsplashes put in behind the countertops, maybe tile out the showers, knowing that eventually we're probably going to take that property, cash flow it out for a few years, and then let the appreciation go up, and then try to time it at the market when it gets towards the top, when the lease expires, move that tenant out, and then resell the property. So that's kind of the strategy with those. It's a shorter term type of a rental, knowing that we're going to eventually sell it, make a nice profit. The C properties, we do it's just a standard scope of work. We don't do the upgrades. We're not doing the tile floors and the tile surrounds and the tile backsplash. We're putting in a nice carpet. We're putting in nice linoleum floors. It's a C style rental property. We're going to cash flow it maybe for 5 years or 10 years or maybe forever. But if we are getting some appreciation and there is a demand for those properties for first time home buyers, we might end up selling it in 5 or 10 years and make our money then. A D property, like I said, we're really narrowing down the rehab. We might put in a low grade carpet, the bare minimum appliances needed, a lower quality paint. We're not doing a ton of rehab to these houses. We're getting them to pass the Section 8 standards. If this B property's rehab cost $20,000 and the C was $15,000, this would be like the $7,500. We're just getting in there, cleaning them up, making them Section 8 approved, and then go ahead and move a Section 8 tenant in it. So that's kind of where I'm at for the scope of work. It's one of those things where you just got to use your best judgment and don't over improve. Definitely don't over improve a D property. You'll see that they're going to beat those up a little bit more, and we're going to get into turnovers in a second. But that's where I'm at with how I do the rental properties for my location and my scope of work. We'll be right back with the next section. Okay, so we're back. So I wanted to talk, when you're talking rental properties, these tenants don't stay in these properties forever in most cases. I mean, I've been in real estate for 10 years. I do have a few tenants that I've had for 8 years so far, which is amazing. When you don't have a tenant move out and you never have, that property never goes vacant, your returns are extremely good. So, but eventually these tenants move out. And when they move out, some companies call them tenant turns. I call them turnovers. Any way you look at it is when that tenant moves out, you've got to go back into that property, touch up paint, clean carpets, if there's something that's broken, fix whatever's broken. You've really got to go through and, make sure that property is in really good condition again. The worst thing you can do is move a tenant into a dirty property that's the carpet stained, there's stuff that's broken. You lose trust with those new tenants when you do that. It gets to the point where it's called, it's customer service. You want to make sure that you're always high on customer service. If you have high customer service and and a customer's going to, and a tenant, I call tenants customers, a tenant is going to grade you on the quality of the property. One thing you got to remember is these tenants are spending the majority of their income on rent. Think about that for a second. The majority of their paycheck is going to rent in most cases. So if that's the case, then they're going to have high scrutiny. So you want to be the best you can be. And so these turnovers are important. So you got to get in there. You've got to go through. You got to fix every little thing that needs to be fixed. It's got to be clean, fresh, smells good. And obviously, you don't want to show a property that's not clean and needs touched up as well. So speaking of turnovers, because it is an important thing, where are we going to try to hit for cost? Well, the cost of this, the goal of this is the security deposit. So that tenant that moves out, if you're a good landlord, a good property manager, you're asking for at least 1 month's rent for the security deposit. And so that security deposit protects you that if they move out and they mess up the place, that that security deposit will cover the turnover. So your goal is to make sure you can turn that property over for the cost of the security deposit. Now, if you're not able to do that, and then you need to, one, find a better turnover crew, or two, charge more for the security deposit if 1 month isn't covering it. So, this is a really important piece to it. Most tenants want to move out, and they want to get their security deposit back. So they're going to move out, and they're going to make sure the place is looking really good. But some tenants really, what their opinion of what it is different than, what it really is. So I'm going to be below. You've got a sheet, the turnover sheet we use. It's a 3-page document. We call it the walkout sheet. You'll go through and literally walk out and check off every single thing that is wrong with the property so that you can document it. The other thing too, when a tenant moves out, you need to take as many pictures as you can. By taking pictures, that protects you in case that tenant says, hey, I didn't get my security deposit back, and you say, well, that's because you left this place a mess, and they say, no, I never, that place was immaculate, and trust me, this will happen. If something happens and you end up going to court and you have to prove your side, all you have to do is show those pictures to the judge, and they're going to vote for your side. If you don't have pictures, it's going to the tenant. You're going to have to pay the tenant back the security deposit. The courts favor the tenants in terms of security deposits, so you have to have a lot of documentation. So use my walkout sheet that's attached below and go through and make sure that that it's filled out and it's accurate. The other thing too is you're going to use that same sheet for the walk-in sheet. So when you move a tenant in, if there's something wrong and that tenant spots it, they need to mark it off on that move-in sheet so that they're not held accountable for that when they go to move out. So make sure that you do those things for every single tenant. So the reason that stuff's important is because there's only 2 things that can ruin your investment. When you really think about it on a rental property, is the mortgage going to change? No, that's pretty much set. Is the taxes going to change? Well, they could go up a little bit here or there, but they could also go down. Is the insurance going to change? Maybe a little bit over time. Or it could go down over time. You get a lot more units, you get a better deal. So all of the normal things, the taxes, insurance, management fee is going to stay the same percentage, so you're not going to add a lot of costs. But the 2 things that can ruin your investment are maintenance. So if you've got a maintenance, number, like I use $75 a month, and if it's costing you $250 a month to maintain these properties because the tenant's calling every other day, that could potentially ruin your investment. If you've got $100 cash flow in your formula and it's costing you an extra $100 or $200, then you're losing money on that property. So that's why you've got to make sure you use my scope of work when you rehab that property. You don't want to have anything missing. One, you want to make sure that when that tenant moves in, they're happy that there's nothing broken and everything works, like outlets and switches and windows and door locks and all that. My walkout sheet will have all that on there for you. So, that you want to make sure they're happy moving in, but also you don't want a bunch of maintenance. It's a lot more expensive to go in and work on a property when a tenant's living there versus when the house is vacant and you can just do all the things at one time. So make sure your maintenance is under control. The other thing is vacancy. You do not want these houses going vacant. The minute they go vacant, most of the time, a house only has to be vacant 2 to 3 months out of the year, and you won't make a profit then for the year. So think about that. You can't have these things go vacant. So when we do turnovers, we want these turnovers done in 7 days or less. So if somebody moves out on the 31st, by the 7th, that house is relisted and up for rent again. You want to make sure you hit those numbers. You've got to keep this under control, and you've got to get the turnovers done quickly and back on the market and re-rented. So if you can keep somebody for a couple of years without them moving out and paying on time, that's ideal. What we do is we do 1-year leases. Okay, so when When that 60 days before that lease comes due, we send a notice to the tenant saying, hey, in 60 days, we want to know if you want to renew or vacate. Now, if that tenant says, I'm going to vacate the property, I want to find out why, first of all. And if it has anything to do with maintenance, I want to definitely address those issues with the property management company. Or if I'm managing it myself, I need to talk to whoever is taking those maintenance calls. So we want to try to get that tenant to renew. So what I do, I don't raise the rent on the second year. So if a tenant's there for 12 months and they're a really good tenant and they paid on time and they weren't calling me every day for maintenance and they weren't a big hassle, then I'll renew their lease without raising their rent. If they were an okay tenant and they paid on time but they had a lot of maintenance calls, then I'll raise their rent. And if they move, I'm not really losing anything because they were a high maintenance tenant anyway. But if they stay, I'm covering that, the fact that they're calling for a lot of maintenance. Now, on year 3 on that tenant, even if they're a good tenant, now I adjust the rent up. I might adjust it up, 3 to 5%, so maybe $50 a month, and they're okay with that by then. If you raise the rent after the first year, they feel like you're going to do that forever. So we like to wait and do that on year 3. So that's pretty much how I handle the turnovers and the timelines and maintenance and vacancy. One other thing that we do, and this is important when it comes to maintenance, on every single maintenance call we get, we always make sure we call that tenant back after the technician, whoever did the repairs, leaves. We want to know 2 things. Was the technician friendly, and was the work done to your standard? If both of those questions are yes, we close the work order and we know that tenant's happy. If you just rely on the maintenance man or the technician to just do the job and then you leave it at that and nobody ever follows up with the tenant, you're never going to know if there's a good job or not, and you're going to have high move-out rate. You've got to keep these tenants in the houses in order to make sure your vacancy doesn't go out of control. And then if that's the case, you're going to make a lot of money doing rental properties. Anyway, go ahead and I want you to hit pause, go review some of the attachments that I've included as far as the walkout sheets, and then we'll be back for the next section. Okay, guys, it's time for an action step. Okay, so we're back. So let's talk about property management. So you've got these rental properties, or your first one, and you're planning on buying X amount of properties over time to really take advantage of that long-term wealth. Now, do you make the decision, do I self-manage or do I hire a property management company? Well, I think you should self-manage in the beginning for the first, 5 to 10 properties, so you really get a feel for what's happening. Just like when you're buying houses in the very beginning, it's good to walk through a few. You can really start to see it. When you do a few rehabs, it's good to be involved with those first few. I'm not saying swing a hammer, but I'm saying be there on the job site so you can see what happens. Same with property management. So I managed all my own properties up until I had 22 different properties, which were like 30-something units total, because some of them were multifamily. And I learned a lot about property management. I learned how to be diligent, how to do fast turnovers, how to do turnovers for a good cost, how to get maintenance done fast but inexpensive. And I learned what some of the biggest maintenance problems were with rental properties. So I like the idea of managing yourself in the beginning. You really get a good feel for how it's done. Eventually, you'll probably get to the point, if you buy a lot of them, that it's too much of a hassle, it takes too much out of your day, and at that point, it's probably good to hire a property management company. Now, this is near and dear to my heart because, you probably saw some of the promotional videos, and Dean talked about, I hired a bad property manager and kind of took my eye off the ball, and I had a whole bunch of houses go vacant, and the tenants were unhappy, the maintenance wasn't getting done, and tenants were leaving like crazy, and they weren't paying and everything else, and I had all kinds of problems, and I was losing a lot of money because of that. Well, I decided to, so I managed all the way up until I had 22. Then I handed it off to somebody else, and for years didn't have any problems. Then all of a sudden we had a lot of problems. So then I basically took all my properties back in-house. So now I manage all 400 plus of my houses in-house. Now, I have a whole staff. I'm not the one taking every phone call or doing stuff like that. I've hired out and built a system so that my team does all that. But I can control the money. I can control what happens. I can build the systems. And we've built a really good company. And I would have to say that our property management company is just as good or better than any other company in the United States. So, I like that idea. You might get to the point where you never get to 400 houses because you may not want that many. Or you get to the point you hit 20, 25 and you've got a really good paying job and you don't want the hassle. The biggest thing is there's a lot of details and a lot of things that can go wrong, but I'm going to teach you guys what to watch for so that you don't get taken by surprise like me. There's a way to bulletproof this whole thing. And so what I've done is I've created a separate little addition to this program. We're not going to go through all the details right now, but below you're going to go to a video. And in that video, it's going to teach you step by step what to talk to the property managers about, what to ask them, what to look for every single month so that you don't get taken by surprise. There's specific questions. It doesn't matter what book you read on property management in the United States. It's almost like the people that teach property management or write the books on property management have never owned a lot of property. So I've got stuff that you should really be asking the real questions, the important stuff on how they run their business. And I'm going to teach you guys all that. I want you to go through that video below. But before we do, we're going to wrap this thing up and talk about exit strategy. So, when you buy these rental properties, there's, like I said in the beginning, you're either going to hold these properties for a few years, wait till the market goes towards the top, the tenant, don't renew the tenant's lease, go in there, clean up the house, put it up for sale with a realtor and sell it for top dollar. That's one strategy. One other strategy is hold it for a couple of cycles, maybe own it for 10, 15, 20 years. Now it's gone through the cycle maybe twice, and it's really increased in value. You've had cash flow for years, and now 20 years later, there's no mortgage. It's worth twice as much. The rent's twice as high. Maybe you sell it at that point, and then you make a huge capital gain. Or maybe you never sell. I have my strategy is I'm going to take a portion of houses that I'm never going to sell, that I'm going to pay off, and I'm going to have all this cash flow every month. And I can get to the point where I've got my own property management company. I own all these houses free and clear, and I can that's basically my retirement income that I'm just going to make forever. That's my strategy. So I'll sell a few off in a couple years. I'll sell a few off in 10, 15 years, and then there's some that I'm never going to sell. You need to make that decision, but there's a lot of benefits to each different strategy. But be thinking about that. When you go into that rental property, you should have that strategy defined. Hey, on this one, it's a B property. I plan on holding it for 3 years and I'm going to sell it. Or, hey, this one's a C. I'm going to hold this one for 10, 15 years. Or, hey, I'm going to hold this property forever. Be thinking about your exit strategy so that you go into this thing the right way and you know what to expect. Anyway, what I want you to do, I hope you've learned a ton from this so far. There's a lot more to learn. Click that property management video. Study that video. I'm going to go through everything that you need to know and ask your property manager. I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll catch you in the next segment. Okay, guys, watch this video, and then it's time for an action step, and I'll be back as soon as the video is done. Hey, everybody. I wanted to do a video also for you guys on property management. Now, like I said, property management is near and dear to my heart, and, this is one of the most important pieces if you're going to own rental property. Whether you have long-term rentals or if you're using a property management company to do even take care of your lease options. So there's a few things that most people miss. Most of the time when somebody interviews a property management company, 100% of their focus is what are your charges? What do you charge me to manage my properties? Is it 8%, 9%, 10% of the gross rent? Remember, most companies will charge, let's say it's 10%. So if it's $1,000 a month, they'll charge $100 a month. And everybody gets so focused on what are you charging me, but they forget or they simply don't know the right questions to ask. Is your monthly, management fee important? Of course. You always want to get the best deal you can get, but don't ever sacrifice your monthly maintenance or management fee if you're going to get the wrong type of a service after that. I would much rather pay 10, 12% to a property management company that can deliver me my cash flow every month, that keeps all my houses rented, that keeps good tenants in there paying. So I want to talk about some of the questions that people don't know to ask or don't, or forget to ask, the more important stuff. So first of all, remember, this whole property management thing is about vacancy and maintenance, as we were talking about before. All your other costs and expenses are fixed, but your return is 100% based on vacancy and maintenance. If you don't have a tenant in there, you're not bringing any income in. If your maintenance is really high and through the roof, then it'll ruin your return as well. So think about that. So when we talk about that, we've got to go back and think about that. So one of the first things I'll ask is, hey, how long does your average turnover take you to complete? So from the time the tenant moves out to the time you clean up and ready the house or the apartment for the next tenant, that process, how long does that take you on average? I want to know days. If they say 30 days, they're fired. It's not going to work. The number should be 7 to 10 days or less. Remember, if it takes 30 days I've had property managers take months to turn over a property. I mean, we're talking about 2 days work. It should not take a month or 2 months to turn over a property. You go in there, you clean up, you touch up the paint, you clean the carpets, you deep clean the property. We like to run another drain cleaning through the property so there's no issues with the drains. And you take somebody back in there, take pictures, and you get that property listed again so you can get it rented. So it's 7 to 10 days. So in order to make sure that they hit that, just ask them at the end, when we get all done with these questions at the end, just say, hey, who do you have? Well, give me 3 references of current clients that you manage for that are really happy with your services. So again, how long is your turnover? Should be 7 to 10 days. And then I want to know, how much does it usually cost to turn that apartment back over or that house back over and get it ready? Can you do it for the cost of the security deposit? So ask them, hey, how much does it cost for your average turnover? If they say, oh, we can do it for $3,000 to $5,000, that company's fired. You can't, if we want to rehab this property again, we're never going to make cash flow. Think about it. If you cash flow $200 a month, let's call it $250, that's $3,000 a year. If that tenant moves out in 12 months and it's another $3,000, you made no money. You made no money on your return on your investment. So, it's got to be done for the cost of the security deposit. It should not cost you anything. This should be charged back to the tenant. So keep that in mind. If they don't have a good turnover crew, don't use them. This is an important piece to this whole thing. So find out what the average cost it takes. Then you want to say, well, how long does it take for you to fill those properties? On average, if you've got a vacant property, how long does it take to fill once it's turned over, once it's ready to go? If it's 60 days, that won't work. If it's 30, it's got to be 30 days or less. That's really should be. Now, I will cut a lot of companies slack if it's during the hard time of year. For example, in the Midwest in the wintertime, especially right around Thanksgiving, Christmas, it's a lot harder to fill properties during those months. That doesn't mean I let anybody off the hook. You have to do more marketing to make up for the holidays and the cold weather. We still rent houses really fast in the month of December. So, but ask, how long does it take on average? And then you can go through and, one little trick that I do is I'll go on Zillow and, if this property management company is syndicating everything to Zillow, which they should be, then that'll have a days on market on Zillow. So if that person says, oh yeah, we fill everything in 2 weeks, and you've already done your homework and went on to Zillow and found properties on Zillow that were being managed by that particular company, which is easy to do. Once you go to the for rent section and you look up some properties and start clicking on them, if you see that particular company is advertising and it's 60, 90, 120 days, then you can say, well, so if you're doing them in 2 weeks, why I looked at 123 Main Street here and it's been up for 120 days. Why is that? And ask them some questions and see how they respond. If they say something, well, that one's way overpriced and the owner we're managing for on that property will absolutely not lower the price even $10, and, we're marketing the crap out of this thing and they're still it's just priced a little too high, that's maybe understandable. If you drive by that property and there's no sign in the yard and you look it up on Craigslist, and that's the type of stuff I'll do, is I'll find one that's been on the market for a while, managed by that company, and I'll go on Craigslist and do a search for that property, or I'll go and drive by it and see if it's something that, just doesn't have a sign in the yard. Then I'll figure out for myself, this company's not serious about marketing. So make sure that you're asking that question. I want to know too, how much competition do I have? So like, for example, so you could ask, how many units do you manage in general in your company? And if they say, well, we have 1,000 units under management. And then I say, okay, well, right now, look it up on your computer. How many units of those 1,000 units you have under management, how many are vacant currently? And if they say, well, we got 150 vacant, well, then you got a major problem. That means that they've got a 15% vacancy, which is not good. That's way too high. It should be 5% or less. So on 1,000 units, if they're managing 1,000, they should have, 50 units available or so. Something in that range. And if it's higher than that, I would want a good reason. Like, for example, right now we've got, 150 vacant because we just took over 100 properties from a really bad property manager. This owner came to us and said their management company wasn't very good and they had a lot of vacancies. So we just took a bunch of vacants away from that company, and that's why we have so many. Totally doable, at that point I totally understand. So I would like to hear some of that type of feedback. The other thing you got to think about is, hey, you've got a company with 100 vacants and, you're giving them 5 properties and 4 of the 5 are vacant and you want them to list your properties for you. You've got a lot of competition with that particular company. When somebody calls in to rent a property, they're going to give these people a lot of different options. It's going to be hard to fill your properties when you're competing against 100 other properties. So kind of keep that in mind. The other thing is when we talk about vacancy and maintenance is I want to know about their in-house maintenance team. If they have an in-house maintenance team. If a tenant calls and says, hey, my faucet's leaking, and they call a plumber's going to charge you $100, $120 an hour to come out and look at that. It's great that you hire a licensed guy, but to fix a leaky faucet doesn't take a rocket science, and it certainly doesn't take a licensed plumber. And if they charge, you go out there and they charge you $120 to tighten up some fittings, you got a major problem on your hands. But I look for companies that have in-house maintenance teams. I want somebody on staff. They're making $15 to $20 an hour. They're not low wage, but they're not making $100 an hour through a licensed company. Then they can go out and fix that faucet in half an hour, and you're getting charged $10, $20, $30. Okay, that's doable. That's how you maintain the maintenance budget. So it's always vacants and it's always maintenance. So the other thing I want to know is what's their current delinquency. So you've got 1,000 units under management. How many of those people are late every month? I want to know a small number, because whatever it is that they tell you, that's what your properties are going to be too. So if they've got 150, 200 tenants that are paying on the 20th of the month, you know that there's a 20% chance that your tenants are going to pay late too. That means you're going to get slower, rent money coming in, and a delinquency generally turns into an eviction. And if you've got an evictions, you've got vacancy. If somebody lives in your house but they're not paying, you've got a vacancy basically. Even worse now, because who knows what's happening to the property. So I want to know what their delinquency rate. Then I want to know what their eviction rate is. How many tenants do you evict each month? You got 1,000 under management. You're evicting 100 a month. That's not good. Again, that eviction rate should be 1%, something in that range. They should be evicting very, very few people. Again, if you're asking them these questions, these are the important questions people forget to ask, then you'll find out, the true story. The other thing too is, again, when you ask for references, they'll tell you. You want to ask those references. When you get those references, you want to ask those people the same exact questions. You will get the truth. So anyway, those are some of the questions outside of the normal Normal questionnaire we ask once we find what we think is a good property manager. You ask those questions, you'll find out the true story. Again, don't skip this step. This is one of the most important pieces. This property management company holds your equity, holds your future value, holds your future cash flow in their hands. So anyway, I hope that explains it. I wish somebody would have told me some of these questions to ask over the years. I didn't know to ask some of that stuff, and I had major problems on my hands before I even knew what hit me. So anyway, I hope that helps, and we'll keep going from there.